My friend Abdullah Gondal sent me a lecture by Yasir Qadhi where he pretty much says the same things I've been saying in my own videos, that human beings perceive Islam from totally different emotional and cultural paradigms, and this is why we see things differently. Not because of strength of evidence, but because of psychological, emotional, cultural and social factors. It's not about being dishonest, arrogant or covering up the truth. Belief and disbelief is not about being a good or evil person, which is why, even if Islam were true, disbelief is not a crime, let alone worthy of eternal torture. And bear in mind that according to the Qur'an, the vast majority of the human race will go to hell. According to Hadith, 99.9% of all human beings who have ever lived will be tortured eternally. As I have said before, I respect Yasir Qadhi for his honesty and his courage in tackling difficult issues. But when watching his explanations about why non-Muslims fail to see the arguments for Islam, one cannot avoid the obvious flip side to that.
If solid arguments and good personality were enough to convince the world of the truth of Islam, the Quraysh would have been convinced of the Prophet ﷺ as soon as the Prophet ﷺ opened his mouth. And remember that even our Prophet ﷺ, it took him 23 years of constant preaching, and even then, it wasn't his arguments that won the Quraysh over at the end of the day. It was the political conquest of Mecca. It was the political conquest of Mecca that eventually caused the leadership of the Quraysh and the people of Mecca en masse. وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. So we need to be very, very frank here. Strong arguments by themselves will never win converts. We also need to be aware of some of the psychological problems, and our psychologists fully understand the technical term for it, or the mass term for it, is groupthink. Groupthink. This is the biggest problem, and it is a technical psychological term, groupthink. You can call it social conditioning. Groupthink is when you are born and raised in a group, you will think like the group. It's very simple, right? When you're born and raised in a group, you will think like the group. And you will assume that that's group's relative orientation, standards, mechanisms, mannerisms, culture, theology, everything that you associate with your own group, that is automatically the default. That is where you begin looking at the whole world through the lens of your own group that you have happened to be born and raised amongst. So the point is that we need to be cognizant of this issue called groupthink and understand it is very, very, very difficult to persuade someone to break away from the group. And in fact, the fact of the matter, at some level, we are all guilty of groupthink. Every one of us is quote-unquote guilty of groupthink here. Like we are tickled, we're amused at something we have never been exposed to. I'm trying to express to you how difficult it is for a human being to break away from the construct they happen to be born and raised in, to break away from the social norms, from the values that they happen to be raised in. The second thing to be aware of is something that psychologists have called in-group bias. You are always biased towards your own group, and you make excuses for your own group, and you look positively at your own group versus those who are outside of it. What your group does, if the same thing were to be done by somebody outside, you would problematize it. But when it's done by your side, your people, your group, in your minds, you find a justification, right? Now, why is this important? Because we are the other when it comes to this society. And things that our religion has done, or the Prophet ﷺ has done, or has happened in the Sahaba's time, this is not in-group bias. We have in-group bias when we look at those things. We find an easy justification. From our paradigm, it makes sense. But realize, if the same things had happened against us, we would have not found justification for those things. The point is that whoever you identify with, you will always look at in a more sympathetic light. And whoever you think of as the other, as outside of you. You don't identify it. You will dismiss, you will criticize, you will exaggerate. This is in-group bias. You make a million excuses for your own, right? And everything that your group does, it just falls into place naturally. We need to understand, whether we like it or not, some of the tactics that we know in our textbooks, we're looking at it from one side of the aisle, and the other guys are looking at it from the other side of the aisle. You're not going to be able to justify or contextualize. It really depends on who do you sympathize with. What side do you consider yourself to be a part of? My dear Muslim brothers and sisters, there is a reason why the political strength of Islam followed the ideological and theological conversion. If you understand what I'm saying. If you don't, then think about it. There is a reason why the borders of the Muslim world today are essentially the borders of the Umayyad and Abbasid and Ottoman empires. Groupthink. When groupthink is positive, it's great. You want to keep it that way. Excellent. When groupthink is for Allah and His Messenger, alhamdulillah, it's great. When groupthink is the opposite, it's a problem. It really is a problem. It's a problem for us. It's a problem for our children. It's a problem for da'wah. And by the way, please don't quote me Malaysia and Maldives and whatnot. Please don't say, oh, look at those. Because firstly, they were exceptions. And secondly, do you know how those exceptions occurred? How did Malaysia become a Muslim land? How did the Maldives become a Muslim land without the political dominion of Islam, get what I'm saying here, reaching them? How? Do you know? I'm asking you. Yes. Trading. That's what they teach you in Sunday school. MashaAllah. Your whole knowledge of Islam comes from Sunday school. Oh, high school Sunday school. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Okay, alhamdulillah. Excellent. Their rulers converted to Islam. When their rulers converted to Islam, the people were essentially socially forced to follow. Sometimes politically, by the way, but socially forced to follow. My dear brothers and sisters, because of the internet, we don't have the luxury to be in our beautiful bubble anymore. Because of the internet, I am strongly against ignoring the bigger problems out there and just teaching these half Sunday school myths. I have talked to too many people who have left the faith of our own children, and they say to me, we were taught lies, we were taught truths. It's not correct what we were taught. The third issue here. What is our perception of the Sira versus their perception of the Sira? When I talk to the average Muslim and I say to them, describe for me the Prophet ﷺ. Or I ask the average Muslim, tell me your top 5 incidents from the Sira. What do you think they're thinking about? All of you yourselves think about them. Describe the Prophet ﷺ. You're thinking of his mercy, of his smile, of how he was loved to the Sahaba, of. When you talk about the incidents of the Sira, you're going to think about the Ta'if one and how he withstood it. You're going to think about Makkah and how he forgave. And alhamdulillah for that. That's who we are. But we need to be intelligent enough to understand. When we give da'wah to other people, do you think that is the image they have of the Sira? See, here's the point. We have a disconnect. Our narrative of the Prophet ﷺ, our image of our Prophet is totally disconnected from their image. Public awareness has increased to the level that everything they know about our Prophet ﷺ, it's not an outright lie. It is, they've chosen this, that, oh, the massacre Banu Qurayza, they said, right? Or married to this many women. And they construct an image of a person we don't even recognize. But when you go and look at what made that image, point after point, a lot of times these points are valid, right? It's just a matter of what do you emphasize, how do you construct the image versus how do they construct the image. They could construct an image that is so radically different from ours and yet still based upon our books and our tradition. We will say, you've only chosen those aspects. How will they respond to us? What will they say to us?
Why do those aspects even exist?
Number one, why do those aspects even exist? Number two, You've also picked and chosen. Exactly. Right? You see, we have to be intellectually honest enough to say this. Right? They will say to us, firstly, even if we chose these 10 points, why do these 10 points exist? They're problematic. You are telling us He is rahmatan lil alameen. You are telling us He is qudwa. You are telling us He is the role model. Well, if He's a role model, even if it's 10% of His life, explain that 10%. And isn't that a valid understanding from their perspective, right? And then the flip side, we say to them, you're biased. They say back in return, so are you.